Hello, my name is Jacob Marks, and I'm going to be presenting on the paper Crop Pest Classification based on Deep Convolutional Neural Network and Transfer Learning. First, I'm going to be talking about what is the problem that the authors are addressing, then what is their solution. I'll talk about convolutional neural networks, pre-trained architectures for transfer learning, how the authors experimented with the effects of hyperparameters, what their results were from this experimentation, and finally a conclusion. So, what is the problem? In agriculture, pests are a huge problem for different important field crops such as rice, wheat, maize, soybean, and sugarcane. Now, these pests not only directly damage the plant, they can also cause diseases. Now, farmers need to be effective with their pesticide use and biological control methods. And part of that effectiveness is also knowing when to not use them. Now, the issue is that a lot of these pests look very similar to other pests or very similar to native species, which aren't going to be harming the plants. So, farmers need to be effective with their classification and identification of the crop insects, and this is an extremely difficult task. So, there have been a number of solutions and related works that the authors have talked about. And the things that all of these have in common is machine learning. So various ones have used different vision-based machine learning systems to try and identify plant diseases, plants, insects, and various crop pests. So from Ferentinos down, all of these used convolutional neural networks, which are extremely good for automatic feature extraction. So the author's proposed solution is a convolutional neural network model that they intend to provide higher accuracy in insect classification. They use pre-trained convolutional neural network models with transfer learning and 3 different data sets to test their solution. They evaluated different deep convolutional neural network models with transfer learning, including AlexNet, ResNet, GoogleNet, and VGG network. So what datasets did they use? They used NB-AIR with 40 different pest types. So these are all different types of pests in the dataset that needed to be classified. XIE1 with 24 pest types, and XIE2 with 40 pest types. The first thing they needed to do with the datasets was pre-process the images. First, they converted them to grayscale. Then they used canny edge detection to try and find the insect in the image. Using this edge detection, they would try and crop to a bounding box around the insect, like in this figure. They would then resize the final image, whatever size it was, to 227 pixels by 227 pixels. A standard size is necessary for the different convolutional neural networks. So here's an example of some of the different insect classes seen in the datasets. So many of them are extremely different. You're going to have winged insects, various different colors, but you're also going to have a lot of insects that look extremely similar. Different true bugs like number 9 and 25 or 19, also different beetles like 4, 5, and 12, the different caterpillars like 1 and 10. Some of these can be extremely difficult to tell apart, which is why a well-trained model is especially necessary. So what is a deep convolutional neural network? Well, convolutional neural networks are extremely good for automatic feature extraction. The creator of the model does not need to define all the features themselves. It's extremely good for image processing and then classifying these images. The main parts of it are different layers. There's convolutional layers, pooling layers, fully connected layers, and some of the models used in this paper use other layers as well. Now, the convolutional layer acts as a filter, and it extracts the features. The pooling layer attempts to downsample this and reduce the spatial size. This helps to prevent overfitting. The fully connected layer and the softmax activation function takes the higher level features and classifies them into categories. The convolutional neural network model proposed by the authors uses 6 convolutional layers, 5 max pooling layers, and also the fully connected layer at the end and the softmax classifier. The first convolutional layer uses 8 initial convolution filters with a kernel size of 5 by 5, and a rectified linear unit activation function is applied. The max pooling layers use 2 by 2 and are applied after every convolutional layer. The second convolutional layer uses 16 filters instead of the initial 8 with a 5 by 5 kernel size. From here on, the convolutional layers continue increasing in kernel size from 32 to 64, 128, and 256, all with a 3 by 3 kernel size. They applied batch normalizations between the convolutional layers. Now the C at the end for the number of neurons in softmax is the number of classes in that dataset. So for NB-AIR it's going to be 40, but for XIE1 it's going to be 24. Now, what is transfer learning? So deep learning models contain a layered architecture with different layers to learn complex features, as seen in the deep convolutional neural networks in the slide before. In transfer learning, this layered architecture is allowed to use the pre-trained models without the final classification layer. So this way, they can use this whole model just for feature extraction and then append their own layers to this initial model. This saves a great deal of training time. So the different models they used were AlexNet, ResNet, GoogleNet, and VGG network. So AlexNet uses 5 convolutional layers, 3 max pooling layers, and the initial model included 3 fully connected layers, the final of which had 1,000 neurons fully connected and a layer fed to a softmax function. For this, they replaced the last 3 with a fully connected layer, a softmax layer, and then an output classification. Now, ResNet used special residual blocks, which I will get to in a moment. So ResNet has 50 layers with 7 by 7 convolutional layers with 64 kernels, 3 by 3 pooling with a stride of 2, and 16 residual blocks with 7 by 7 average pooling layers. Now this is for ResNet 50. ResNet 101 has 101 parameterized layers and recurrent connections using transfer learning. It has 33 residual blocks. So the authors added a new fully connected layer and a softmax output layer. So what are these residual blocks? Well, degradation can happen in the system due to an increased number of network layers, and this one has a great deal. But residual blocks allow for a shortcut connection parallel to the normal convolutional layers. So basically individual layers can be shortcutted around and ignored. This results in optimal tuning of the number of layers and much faster training. GoogleNet uses 22 layers, 2 convolutional layers, 4 max pooling layers, 9 inception modules, and then an average pooling layer, fully connected and softmax layer. These inception modules, they have 1 by 1 convolutional layers to perform dimension reduction. This dimension reduction helps because it then goes on to do much more expensive 3 by 3 and 5 by 5 convolutional layers. These modules are linearly stacked. VGG network has small convolution filters of 3 by 3 and max pooling layers of just 2 by 2. There are 2 different variations of VGG. The VGG 16 with 16 layers and VGG 19 with 19 layers, 3 of which are these convolutional layers. So to test their model, the authors used 3 different data sets. As said before, the NB-AIR with 40 classes, XIE1 with 24, XIE2 with 40. They then split these datasets into a training set, 70% of the data, and the other 30% in a testing set. They used MATLAB for the programming, and they used the NVIDIA Quadro K2200 with 4 gigabytes of VRAM to allow for GPU parallelization. So their proposed convolutional neural network parameters, they intend to use stochastic gradient descent as an optimizer with 0.9 momentum. They tested a variety of learning rates between 0.00005, 0.0001, 0.0005, and 0.001. They tested max epochs up to 10 and a mini batch size of 10, 16, 32, 64, and 128. The epochs is the full training cycle over the entire training dataset, while mini batches is the subset of the training set. Mini batches are used for evaluating gradient descent loss function and updating the weights. The accuracy is, of course, the number of insects predicted correctly over the total number of input insect samples. The loss function is given below. The first thing they tested was the effects of convolution and pooling layer numbers in their proposed convolutional neural network model. They tested this with a learning rate of 0.0001, 10 epochs, and a mini batch size of 64. They increased the convolutional network number and the pooling layer number from 3 and 2 up to 4 and 3, 5 and 4, 6 and 5, and 7 and 6. They tested this for each data set, NB-AIR in yellow, XIE1 in green, and XIE2 in blue. So as you can see, the accuracy increased quite a bit up until convolutional size 6 and 5 pooling layers. After this, the accuracy started decreasing, and the authors figured that any further increases would also lead to further worse accuracy. Testing the different hyperparameters, they first talk about the learning rate. So they tested this with 10 epochs and a mini batch size of 64. So the learning rate doesn't have quite as drastic a change on the accuracy, but it does increase with 0.0001, and any larger learning rate decreases the accuracy. So the authors decided to stick with the 0.0001 accurate learning rate. Testing the number of epochs, they tested it with the decided learning rate before in a mini batch size of 64. So there's a great deal of accuracy increase up to number 4 epochs, and after that it starts leveling off until it reaches 10, where the authors concluded there would be minimal accuracy increase, and it would only make the efficiency of the program much worse. So they decided that 10 epochs would be the best. Testing the mini batch size, they again used 0.0001 learning rate and 10 epochs. The larger the batch size makes this run much longer, so it's preferable to have a smaller batch size. They found that after 64, the accuracy begins decreasing, so they decided to stick with the size 64 batch size. So overall, their proposed model achieved a much better accuracy than the other models they tested and used for their transfer learning. All of this using a learning rate of 0.0001, 10 epochs, and a mini batch size of 64. So ResNet 101 in gray provided a pretty high performance for NB-AIR with an accuracy of 95.02%. XIE2 with 93.99%. GoogleNet performed well for XIE1 with a 96.25%, but the proposed model was much higher than all of them, with a 96.75 for NB-AIR, a 97.47% for XIE1, and a 95.97% for XIE2. Sorry, 95.97% for XIE2. So XIE1 performed the best because it's a much smaller number of insect classes, much less that the models need to much less information the models need to gain from the extracted features. So the authors had a number of sources and related works they talked about. Of a special importance was their data sets, the NBAIR one here and the XIE ones from here. They named these data sets after the main author of these papers. The models they used, AlexNet, ResNet, GoogleNet, and VGG network, are all given in these papers. So in conclusion, the quality of crops is greatly affected by pests. The pests don't just damage the plants, they can also cause diseases, and identifying the correct pest is extremely important. However, the pests are very difficult to identify. It takes time, many of them look similar to each other, and they can also look similar to other species that people in agriculture don't need to worry about. Convolutional neural networks have been used before. They've been used for insect classification, they've been used for identifying various plant diseases, and they've been used quite effectively. But in this paper, the authors used transfer learning with pre-trained models to try and get a much better accuracy. And they have. They've had an improved classification accuracy of 96.75%, 97.47%, and 95.96% for the NBAIR, XIE1, and XIE2 data sets respectively. Thank you.